everyone, from Alliance Magazine in London, and welcome to today's event on leadership and philanthropy. We are delighted today to feature Alliance's regional representatives who joined our team earlier this year and are working with us to help raise the profile of philanthropy in parts of the world where there is not as much coverage. I'm Ella Karuhi, I'm the digital editor at Alliance, and I will be the moderator of today's event. But first, just a few notes for everyone attending today before we start. Apologies if you can hear that noise. That's the sound of our audience joining the webinar today. For everyone who's tuning in, you can go ahead and say hello in the chat, which you should be able to access by clicking on the chat bubble, which is either on the right hand or the top of your screen. We're interested in hearing from you today. Which philanthropist or philanthropic leader inspires you the most? Go ahead and share that in the chat, and maybe we'll get a chance to discuss a bit later in the event. We'll also be taking questions later on from the audience, so if you have any that you'd like to ask our panelists, make sure that you ask them here. You can join the discussion on Twitter with @AllianceMag and using the hashtag #Who'sInPower, and those are written on the bottom of our slides, just in case you didn't catch that. Everyone who is attending this event today is entitled to a 20% discount on any Alliance subscription using the code EVENT22. An Alliance subscription will give you access to exclusive subscriber content, 4 issues of the magazine a year, and free access to all future events. You can find a link to our subscription page in the chat area now or coming soon. And we'll be following up by email afterwards with the offer and a recording of this event as well, in case you want to listen back to it or you weren't able to join us today. Also, I wanted to say a word of thanks to our supporter. Support for our regional representatives based in the Arab region, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as for this event, comes from Badr Jaffa, an Emirati philanthropist and the CEO of Crescent Enterprises. Now, I'd like to introduce our panel. We're very delighted to hear from all of you today. Ese Emerhi is the Global Network Weaver at the Global Fund for Community Foundations, and she's the Alliance Regional Representative for Sub-Saharan Africa, and she joins us today from Nigeria. Arti Mohan is the co-founder and partner at SATFA, an Alliance Regional Representative for South Asia, and she joins us from India. Agustín Landa, the founder of the Mexico-based consultancy LANZA, is the Alliance Regional Representative for Latin America. Heba Abou-Shnif is the philanthropy specialist focusing on emerging economies and Alliance Regional Representative for the Arab region. She joins us today from Egypt. And Fan Li, based in Tokyo, is the co-editor-in-chief at SSIR China and the international advisor to the Leping Foundation, and she's the Alliance and Wings Regional Representative for East Asia. We're delighted to have all of you with us today, and a special thanks to those of you who are navigating the extreme ends of the time zone. So now into the main discussion. I'd like to begin by handing the floor over to Ese. Ese, could you start us off by talking about what a successful model of leadership looks like to you and what you think might be wrong with the type of philanthropic leadership we currently have? Ese, are you still on the other end? Okay, I think,
okay, I finally, yeah, I think I was on the attendee side, so I couldn't unmute myself. Okay, great. I think, can everyone hear me now?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. As Elika said, I'm the Global Network Weaver for the Global Fund for Community Foundations. And I think today's conversation is really timely about leadership in the sector. And as much as we want to talk about and promote all of the good work that we are doing in the respective corners where we find ourselves, we need to sometimes also acknowledge the elephant in the room. And that is sometimes we have bad leaders or leaders who are not as effective in their roles. And in reimagining a new humanitarian or aid system that really centers justice and fairness for all, we have to also start to begin to think about the type of new or different leadership we want to migrate or move over to this new world. And I'll start a little bit by just talking about some of the sins of the sector, or what is wrong, or maybe not what's wrong, but where the challenge is. In a study conducted a few years ago by Ali Webb, who is the president and CEO of Ali Webb Strategies, she identified 7 deadly philanthropic sins after speaking to senior philanthropic leaders across all types of different foundations. And some of these are things that are we've talked about in different conversations, global dialogues that we've been having around shifted power or reimagining aid or decolonizing aid. And these 7 sins are blindness to privilege. Any discussion of privilege and power in the sector must also focus on the impact of what privilege looks like when it comes to giving. The second sin is dismissing community knowledge. There have been many articles and people have spoken about the need to really center community representatives in whatever initiative that we want to do, taking the time to listen for the possibilities and then adapt to community knowledge. The third one is around misplaced accountability. Who are we truly accountable to when we do the work that we do? Is it to our board members? Is it to the donor? Or is it to the community that we are trying to serve or to protect in some cases? The fourth one is around poor partners. Collaborations can have significant benefits when it's truly done in an authentic way. It leads to larger pools of financial resources, mitigating donor risk, helping to enter new policy or geographic areas, and shaping policy agendas. These are some of the positive or benefits that can come out of true effective collaborations, but oftentimes poor partnerships hinders this. I think the fifth one is really around failure to learn as we are doing this. And this all connects to leaders and why we're talking about this. Failure for me is just information. It's not something to shy away from. But we also really need to create spaces where people can learn and lean into setbacks and failures. The sixth one is around risk aversion. And really the question here is risk to whom? We should not really be afraid to take on bigger and bigger risks when we are funding or doing the work that we do. Because at the end of the day, for some, it literally means life or death. And then the last one, the last philanthropic sin is lack of transparency. We can be much more transparent about our values, about how we work, about how we make the decisions, what impact really means. So I guess the question was for me that was addressed is really what is wrong with the type of philanthropic leadership we currently have, and there's been numerous scandals of someone doing something wrong in a particular organization, and usually there's of course shock and chaos that comes after it. Maybe there's an investigation, but many times it is sort of swept under the carpet, and that person is either moved or relocated to a different country or to a different office to continue that harm in that new environment. And there really isn't accountability for when things go wrong. What do we do? Oftentimes there's silence. Oftentimes there is the uncertainty about exactly how do we react. And for me, especially in the African context, has more and more Black leaders stepping up and getting into positions of leadership. There needs to be sort of an element of care, because Black people, Africans, or especially when we step into these roles, we are bringing a lot of perspectives, sometimes even a lot of trauma into these roles that needs to be accounted for and needs to have space for true effective leadership to happen. I think ultimately, though, I have more questions than answers in terms of what are the next steps for correcting wrong or ineffective or bad leadership. I think we need to be bold. We need leaders who are not afraid to make mistakes. We need leaders who challenge the status quo. We need leaders who intentionally set aside time to nurture and to build up the next generation of leaders. We need leaders with empathy and with feelings. One of the things I wanted to mention here is that looking closely at many of the institutions, the philanthropic institutions on the continent, we are seeing a lot more women in positions of leadership. And maybe it's too early now to dive into the analysis of what this could mean for the philanthropic sector when we have more and more women in positions of power. Would this lead to more empathy in how we do the work that we do? Would this lead to different perspective or a different way of doing the work? Would it mean less mistakes? Would it mean more leaders who care? Maybe the data isn't out there yet, because this is an emerging trend that I, for me at least, I'm noticing on the continent. And so we may need some more time to think about what this could mean, feminist leadership, the different models that feminist organizations have been championing or at least promoting. Could these models be the new way of how we center leadership, how we center specifically African or Black leadership into philanthropic positions, leadership positions, and what that means? I could say a lot more in terms about the scandals, but I will leave this with, I'll probably just end my comments now with a quote from Robert Greene, who says, understand the fundamental task of any leader. So to understand the fundamental task of any leader, it is to provide a far-reaching vision, to see the global picture, to work for the greater good of the group and maintain its unity. That is what people are craving in the leaders that we are looking for today. We have to avoid ever seeming petty, self-serving, or sometimes indecisive leadership, especially when it comes to crisis. We need leaders who can take action quickly, and if that action happens to not be the right one, to admit a mistake was made and to course correct or to pivot almost immediately or as effectively as that first decision was made.
Thank you, Essie. I think some really interesting ideas in there, specifically around the skills and the qualities that we prioritize in our leadership. And also, I'd love to hear more about these models of leadership that you see as working really well in the African context. But we'll come back to that later. Next, I'd like to hear from Arti. So funders are increasingly supporting leadership programs to support future nonprofit leaders. Are you seeing this in South Asia? Do you think it's having an impact on the sector? I don't think we can hear you, or at least I can't hear you. Maybe your headphones are. No, I'm not sure. We could hear you earlier. Maybe, yeah, let's try this one more time. Maybe we'll troubleshoot this behind the scenes. And next, actually, we'll hear from Agustín. Could you share with us a little bit about what philanthropic leadership looks like in Latin America and what efforts there have been to diversify it in your region? Oh, you're on mute.
You hear me there?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, good. Well, here in Mexico is morning. I'm based in Mexico. Good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Elika, for the invitation. What is the kind of leadership that we are seeing in Latin American philanthropic? I think it's very variable. I have seen philanthropic leadership that is very traditional, very top-down, that It's just to provide some of the resources and opportunities for organizations. Some of them also, I would say, still, and this goes with what Essie says about this indecisive leadership that is not taking sometimes enough risk to make the changes and to even challenge, as she said it also, their own status quo. But I think this is changing also. This is starting to open more, and I would say because of younger generations coming to the foundations in general. Still, I also agree that there is kind of this lineage of privilege in some of the cases, but others are really having this opportunity to go abroad, study, and having opportunities to see other kind of leadership, and they come back and willing to change that. I would say that in Latin America, well, it's a very complex community. You have different countries. Like I have been traveling in the last year very often to Chile, Peru, Colombia, Brazil, and Argentina, and you see different kind of leaderships in different places, where in some cases the philanthropy comes from the companies or the corporate social responsibility initiatives, or you can see in places where the corporation has been sold, and then is the family office who creates, or which creates a foundation on the name of the family to go back or to give back to the community. However, as I was saying, it's very different in different places. Chile, for example, has a strong non-profit sector and a strong group of foundations that are family foundations that are serving, and they are more close to the things that are happening. There are collaborative efforts of four or five foundations, local foundations, doing programs very interesting, investing in the long term of the communities, not in the short term, not just by specific projects that will last maybe a year or 2 years, but maybe in some of the cases investing in 5 to 7 years, and also creating infrastructures or structures of governance within the community, coming from the community. I was in Brazil is different also. There are more corporate funders there, but also some foundations, and the new law that allows them to create endowments. I will think that it will give them a different view also how to do things in Brazil. Colombia and Peru, they are in a different situation. There are also company foundations and interesting leaders moving forward. It's interesting that in the last, let's say, 2 years, the impact investment and impact for investment is growing in the area very rapidly, and that is bringing different approaches to philanthropy doing, but also to new kinds of leadership that are willing to understand more. I was shocked on a trip to Chile, visiting a soup kitchen, and this was very interesting. And this is something I think new leadership of philanthropy has to understand. And we were there in this community, and the guys say, in this community, even that we are poor and we don't have the resources, and some of our peers don't have the best health they should have, nobody is a liability here. We all are asset of this community. We all can give some and support something. For me, that was shocking, because in generally, when we come as philanthropists, we don't see all those assets that exist in the community. We don't value those assets, and we don't act or construct with them. So that is, I think, a quite very important learning for me was, and I hope it could be for other possible funders too, or philanthropies to do that. Regarding if there are training or creation of new leaderships in the community, yes, there are some. I have noticed that, for example, Fundación Bolívar da Vivienda has a program called Aflora, which is training leadership, specific leadership for nonprofits and foundations. Here in Monterrey, in my city, there is a program at the university level called Formar para Transformar, which selects students before they enter the bachelor degree in order for them to support their service to the community. They choose them only because of their quality of service to the community, not only because of their grades, but the quality of service to the community. Then they can get a scholarship, and they have a process of support during the full year, 4 years of career. And then you can see other like LALA, Latin American Leadership Academy in Brazil and Colombia and other parts. So there are some of this. I think there are still young programs to say what are the outcomes, but we surely have to invest more in leadership, and it's something that we need to do. I could say that, Elika.
Thank you, Agustín. It seems like from what you were sharing, it connects a lot actually with these like 7 sins of leadership that Essie was mentioning, especially this idea of dismissing community knowledge. I think that this is happening in communities around the world. But I think Arti is back with us, and so she's going to pick up on that thread of investing in leadership. So we'd love to hear about what that looks like in your own region.
Thanks, and I hope this time I'm audible. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. So I just quickly to go in, I wanted to, from the Asian context and what we've observed and what we've been experiencing, I want to set the context for leadership a little bit for a few minutes before saying that, therefore, what should we invest in? How do we help the emerging leaders in the South Asian social economies? And if you were to look at it, there are 4 types of considerations when it comes to leadership. One is given that the organization and ecosystem structures are going through such a paradigm shift, whichever social economies we take a look at in each of the countries, and each of them have such interesting evolution patterns that we are seeing, we need system leaders first. Leaders that can operate in a networked environment where it might not be confined to an organizational environment where they are bringing together seemingly very different kind of skills and resources, mobilizing various talents within a collective or coalition types of structures and making action happen in a more web-like environment than a very traditional organization. And in many of these networked environments, the organization structure is loose at best. So therefore, for example, we work with the Life Skills Collaborative, which has 16 organizations, 4 funders working with state governments. So the leaders that work to bring in that collaborative really need to demonstrate service leadership. How do you facilitate the space for people to just reflect, coming in from various different lived experiences and then arrive at something that they can take forward? How do you keep that in view, at the same time also keep alive the ambition and aspiration for what the collective must do in order to get to that action? So therefore, the first thing in terms of context, I wanted to say system leadership. Second is we need visionary organization level leaders who can lead change through complex pathways, because whatever may be the issue, whatever may be the size of organization or the ecosystem they're operating in, it's largely undernourished. And we recently just finished a talent management survey where in the Indian context with 100 plus organizations, one of the top things that keeps people back in organizations and contributing to social impact is the leadership practice. What is the quality of leadership that they are experiencing? And that's a direct relation to how motivated and how passionate they are to pursue the social impact journey and join forces. So how do you have and support visionary organization leaders with all the structures and support systems that they need? The third is to look at social impact leadership as a lens. We need as many mainstream leaders to be thinking social impact. I was just reading this book about where Indra Nui talks about how she went to all of the CEOs of snack and beverage companies and made this plea to say, how do we cut sugar? How do we cut salt? How do we look at healthier options? And as a way of doing our business and not as something that we do on the side. So how do you look at social leaders in the mainstream that have so much power in what they are doing, to be able to look at social impact in every little decision and consideration that they are looking at? The fourth is to look at leadership across the organization at all levels, right from the 21-year-old analyst who joins an organization to somebody who has 25 years of qualification in the mainstream sector and suddenly wants to join the social sector. So given all of this, and in India, what we're seeing is that there are, if you take the rule of 70% on the job, 20% exposure, and 10% structured education, we see a lot of programs that contextually bring in cohorts of leaders and take them through that journey. Right, Dasra, Aritra program. There is the one that is done by CSIP and so on. Second is we find incubators or accelerators that focus more on the organization and the entrepreneur at the center of that organization or the leader. So those are some. And the third is we look at a lot of programs that look at small crossover orientation or small topics that they take. But irrespective of the way in which they operate, it's important that if we were to work on leaders at an individual level, that we provide enough support so that they can go back to the organization to apply these learnings. Oftentimes they are transformed, but how do they then go back and transform the organization that they came from? Second is how do we bring together a more strengthened support ecosystem for the leaders to then perform what they're best at with the help of many of these other resources. And third is to be able to look at it also as a global South exchange. We can do what we can do in India or in Indonesia or Thailand and so on, and in the African economies. But the very exciting thing happens when leaders like the Rockefeller Asian Leadership Social Impact Leadership Program in the Global South, and there are a few other emerging fellowship programs. And fellowship programs are a great way to be immersive leadership programs. The last thing I want to say is that if we could have a global exchange when we look at leaders connecting with each other to then bring in those experiences and take it back to their context, that would be great. So these are some of the experiences that we've been seeing across the South Asian context. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arti. I think there's so much in there, especially this idea of a global exchange of leaders. And it would be great to come back to that maybe a bit later to talk about if there are structures in place for that, and if not, what can help set it up. But before that, I'd like to now turn the floor over to Heba. What do the philanthropic leaders of tomorrow need to thrive? And is this a conversation, and is the conversation about development of leadership happening in the Arab region? I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Elsa. It's really nice to be with you today and this amazing show up. It seems that a lot of people have this question about who's in power. With respect to the Arab region, to discuss leadership, it has to be put into the context of this social, political, economic, and educational kind of system. Any discussion about leadership has to take into account this kind of context, because leadership is just a symptom. It's not just the problem. It's a symptom of this wider system that's happening. So I have like 3 observations about our leadership in the Arab region, philanthropic leadership. And one of the main observations is that leadership is slow to change. So you have top leadership positions and governing boards that stay for years. And you find in many countries, for example, in the region, according to the literature, the board of directors stay for unlimited terms. This, of course, ultimately means stifled growth and innovation in philanthropies. At the same time, juxtapose this, you have the exception, which are the Western kind of modeled foundations. So they have the resources to attract the type of leadership that will motivate and deliver. But the wider base, it is more governed by the system that produced these leaders. So just an example, you might have leaders that are entrenched in the system simply because they are able to navigate this restrictive regulatory environment, not necessarily for efficiency purpose, but from that perspective. Another observation about leadership in the region is that's influencing the dynamics is the slow investment in leadership development. So this persistent narrative of efficiency and low overhead costs is really driving this. And the Alliance has shed light on this in this contribution, I think, in the NGO starvation stacking momentum report. And it was basically saying that if you don't invest in the long-term development capacity, institutional building, then you will not have the kind of leadership and human resources that are needed, the calibers. So add to this that there's lack of market competitive incentives to attract leadership in the region. Another observation is the power structure. So in most of the philanthropies, and also the kind of organizations throughout the region, you find a classical hierarchical structure that's kind of like top down. It's a classical kind of structure, but you rarely find those kind of lean, flat structures where there's more room for accessibility and voice. So that's another insight about the region. My last one is to counterbalance these previous points and these trends. The region is undergoing through a demographic transition. So we're already seeing this direct impact of this demographic transition. We have like a third of our population are youth and adolescents, and they are transitioning into like becoming productive citizens. Like the UNICEF highlighted in 2018 that this transition is already happening. What this means for the philanthropic sector, and this is highlighted in the Center for Strategic Philanthropy report from Cambridge University, was published last week, that the new generations are taking leadership positions in philanthropic organizations, and they're also thinking differently about how to conduct philanthropy. So these are my observations about the region. And basically, so it's really a manifestation of a larger problem, but the disruption of these existing models is something that is more of a long-term project. It's not just organizational, it's also a wider system issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heba. I really think that's true. Like, our leaders come from the systems that we have. And I see that there's already some questions in the chat actually along those lines. But before that, we're going to turn the floor over to Fan. So I'd like to hear about leadership in China and Japan. What resources are available for development of leadership in the philanthropy sector in East Asia?
Thank you, Elika. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening and good morning, everyone. I'm very new to this community, and I would like to thank this great partnership between Alliance and the Wings to bring me into today, and I look forward to more dialogues like today. First, I have to be very honest, I was a little bit surprised to find out that so many people sign up on this webinar discuss about leadership. I feel like, haven't we done enough, and have we talked enough about leaderships? So in Asia, mostly in the Northeast Asia that I'm familiar with, namely China, Japan, and South Korea, there are many leadership programs in this sector. I'm sure you're familiar with, like, some are designed for college students who had done a lot of volunteer works, but they're interested in joining the philanthropy sector. Some are business people who want to shift to work for philanthropy. And of course, the majority are the programs designed for people who already work for the sector, but they wanted to learn how to, become a better leader, learn more about leadership. But what I often find in common among the programs, whether I have been part of it or I've been, when I was much younger, I attended, they all have something in common. I mean, I don't know if this sounds familiar to you. It will be a combination of something you would also learn if you go to a business school who talked about leadership, and then plus something that they would tell you, but by the way, in philanthropic sector, it doesn't really work in this way. So I had this question in mind after learning about this webinar is, what makes a successful leadership program? What makes it different from any other leadership programs you come across? I would like to share two observations that I have based on my communication and my work with the organizations in China and Japan. The first one, I'm thinking that as we're all facing this time of crisis and uncertainty, what really requires to be we're looking from leadership is probably a deeper commitment. We all need deep commitment, but we probably need a deeper commitment, something close to a moral courage that you would commit to the cause. And I see that is very important when you talk about leadership in this sector. And I see these keywords come out again and again in this region as well. And the second thing is a skill, or even sometimes it's a willingness to work collectively with others. And I know it's very hard for social entrepreneurs and NGO leaders, especially the charisma leader, because I do it my own way, but we all know the issues we're facing are so big, it just doesn't work in that way. So just share two examples, sort of more from a worm-eyes view instead of bird-eyes view. One amazing program I came across that happened in Japan is run by a nonprofit organization that is located on the coastal area that was affected by the great earthquake and tsunami 10 years ago. What they did is they established this called Grassroots Leadership Academy. Basically, it is designed for young women leaders in the region that was affected by the disaster. What they're trying to do is to encourage them to stand and becoming a leader of the region. Because in Japan, still, if you look into the gender gap index by the World Economic Forum, it's still pretty low compared with other countries, especially for women in rural areas. They suffer a lot from the stereotypes of gender biased behaviors, not only from the society, the community, but also from their own family. For the young female leader, many times they got undervalued on their expertise and how they contribute to the economy. So what I found really interesting was after a couple of conversations with the organization who organized the academy, it's not just about a good leadership program. It's not just about to provide the right contents, but also is to provide as much as you can the right setting that would make people feel they're really related to why they're here. So a very interesting example is sometime when a 3 days program, it's still very hard for people to attend because they have a lot of obligation with their family. And so if you make the program very intense, they are already very intense. So it's very hard for them to relax and to really trying to get the best out of it. So what the program was trying to do is to create a relaxed setting as much as they can. So the people come in and they relax and they can focus and to ask the question, who I am, why I'm here, what is my passion? These all sounds very simple, but I think this touched some roots about what leadership really requires and how can we support leadership, especially among women who has a lot of potential and can create a really good cycle of empowerment in the region. My last point, if I still have a minute, is related to the foundation I'm associated with called Leping Social Entrepreneur Foundation. I have seen this in the past 5 years, this new trend among X generation or generation that under 30 who is emerging as the main force of the philanthropy sector. So what I see, instead of following a charisma leader, they like the idea of a self-organized model where they can have the greater sense of ownership. So what they're saying is nonprofit needs to learn from the successful movement in which a movement leadership emerged from within. So instead of saying, let's go to leadership program, when you have this, if you created this good kind of vibe within the organization, and then whoever you are, if you work in with the organization, then you find your inside and you becoming a leader is self-determined by each individual taking action and contribute to the cause. And Leping Foundation has been trying to move the organization from a charisma CEO-led organization to this new sort of new power dynamic. And many people find this so-called decentralized organized structure can enhance the flow of ideas and lead to a more efficient work environment. I don't know what the future of it. Some people find it's hard because they need people to have the real leadership. But one thing is for sure, people are more interested to support things that they can co-create. So I just leave that here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fan. I think there's so much for institutional philanthropy to learn from social movements with their leadership models. It's then just the question of how is that knowledge shared and how are these models changed. So we're now going to open this up to a Q&A. We can talk about that a little bit. Just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, which is on the right-hand side. And if you don't see it, there might be a little chat bubble at the top of your screen. And then for all of our panelists, if we can all turn our cameras on and maybe we can lower the slides. So actually we'll be able to see each other and have a conversation. So our first question is from Emma Beeston in the chat, who says, how much is leadership about one person and how much should it be collective? Maybe, Heba, do you want to talk a little bit more about systems like you were saying earlier? And then Essie, if I could ask you to share a little bit about models of leadership.
It's both individual and it's multi-layered. I mean, it's organizational level, it's a system, it's like macro level. So they all have to work together. And at the end of the day, the whole is the sum of the parts. So if we're talking on the organizational level, then encouraging people to see like a career trajectory in the sector, listening to their needs and their learning styles, because people learn differently. On the macro level, it's about education systems. So in the Arab region, for example, you have some countries that are putting volunteering into their curriculum that will help build confidence, it will build communication, those soft skills that we're kind of looking for. There's also strategies on volunteering. So that's starting from the kind of the education system and moving on to, and also the kind of programs. So Fan was saying a very important point about commitment. This is very important. People are not committing to the sector. Why? Because of the low kind of the lack of competitive kind of market competitive compensation. So they just leave when they find the first opportunity. So committing to the sector is a factor of, investing in it. Investing in it is having these right programs that give maybe tiered programs. So that's my thoughts on leadership and how to encourage it from a macro and to individual organization level.
I wanted to pick up from what Heba said in terms of tiered leadership, right? Because that's very important, that we do need the increasingly networked web kind of structures. We need leaders everywhere in different contexts. So therefore, what does that leadership look like, which can operate in an uncertain resource-constrained environment and not follow typical hierarchical models, but still be able to demonstrate that movement. So I do think that, and that's where we can learn from social movements quite a bit in terms of just, influence without authority and having that horizontal kind of influence. How do we equip our leaders to have that? But I do think that the focus on the mid to senior leadership within an organization or within a certain coalition is very critical, because in some sense, this would be the core set of people, whether it's a funder organization or an implementation service delivery kind of an organization or an intermediate or knowledge think tank, any kind of organization. So a little bit more emphasis, and I think that's also what the kind of trend that we see programs, it's also where the need is. In a survey we did of over 1,000 NGO leaders, the biggest thing is mid to senior leadership. How do we have more resources, tools, and guidance to develop our leadership styles? But at the same time, across there should be could be an emphasis on a learning organization where everyone learns and everyone learns to be a leader. So that's a different kind of immersive leadership, which it's there, but definitely the emphasis on supporting people in the mid to senior roles.
Thank you, Arti. Agustín.
I can go next, just to comment on follow up on that question. I think it's both. I think it is about the individual and also the collective or the institution. But one thing that is a challenge is that I've noticed many organizations don't benchmark the next leader. it often comes as a surprise or as a shock when there's a transition or a need for a change in leadership, and this shouldn't be. Institutions need to benchmark emerging leaders in the next 5 years, in the next 7 years, who is going to take over that particular leadership, and train and nurture that particular staff member or staff members within that organization. I think that oftentimes is the challenge, because you like a leader and you like what they're doing. It's on a personal level. You believe in him or her, and you believe in their capacity to do something, but it needs to scale down or cascade down to the rest of the organization, so that if that person does leave, they don't take away with them the institutional knowledge or the institutional capacity to do the work that the organization was set up to do in the first place. So I think, in addition to, yes, the individual and the collective, is about benchmarking and shepherding the next generation of leaders, so that they already know that I'm prepared to lead in this particular organization. And I think that goes back to Artie's comment that sometimes, people are not in it for the long term, because it takes that long. It does take a long time to get into leadership position, especially in the nonprofit sector. This is something that you could be doing your work for 5-7 years before you find yourself in leadership positions. And the need to become a leader immediately, the need to have a brand around an individual. Social media has pushed that in recent years, and so it does become about the individual, and they don't have the patience to think long term and to say, yes, I want to step up and I need to prepare myself for the next 10 years to do this correctly and right.
Thank you. And Agustín, please go ahead. I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Alika. I think the question is very, very interesting and very valuable. I really don't believe that there is a possibility of a single leader without a team to lead. Sometimes the followers, let's say it, followers, are the ones that lead and push the leader to be better. So I think that means on what is the kind of people, and I would say culture of the organization, to create that environment where is shared protagonism. The protagonism is not that should not exist. I think protagonism should exist, but it should exist. That means leadership in some way should exist in a shared way. So it depends what is the issue, what is the topic, who is the best to talk about it, who is the best to put the face in front, who is the best to answer the things. In a case of an organization, let's say that there is an issue with a grantee. The best person to work with that grantee would be the officer that attends that grantee. And they have the leadership right there. The backup leader, the institutional leadership is the backup of that person and supports them and helps them to fix the thing. So I think I couldn't believe on one, just that kind of leaders that we used to have before, that I am the savior of the world. I don't think that happens anymore. I don't think that could be happening. It's, in any case, unfortunately, it's our culture. And I think, I don't know who of our panelists said that leadership is a manifestation of the context and also of the culture that we are into. And I think it's changing. I would say that for future leader, the most important quality, the most important competency they will have to have is humbleness. Because humbleness opens the door to learn from others, to listen from others, to collaborate with others, to know that you can failure. So humbleness opens a huge window to be a very effective leader in the future, now that we are in this time. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Agustín. Haba, I'm sorry, I can see your hand is up, but I'm actually going to move us on to the next question just because of time. So this is a question that we had in advance, but it's also echoed in the chat, which is about How free can a leader truly be to sort of enact the changes that he or she wants to when they report to a direction that's ultimately set by a board? And then in the chat, Salvatore Alaimo asks, boards of directors are searching, hiring, and onboarding these leaders and foundations. What role and responsibility do they have in selecting the right person? So I guess that's a question about boards, ultimately their influence in both picking the leaders and on how the leaders act. And so I'm going to put that one first to Fan.
Thank you for throwing me this hard question. Actually, I was quickly going through all the board members I know, and I think there's probably a reason why. Let's face it, many CEO founders of nonprofit organization always wanted to be a member of the board as well, precisely because of this dynamic. And I think what I've witnessed in Asia is, let's make Japan as an example, is when you have this very strong board member, especially when they're very senior by age, they becoming more of a obstacle or challenge, if I put it in a nice way, than trying to help the organization grow. So I'm not saying that the board should have less power, and I think this power of balance is important. But I think it may be time to review the relationship, or what is really the dynamic for nonprofit organization to have these boards versus the teams who are working, and most importantly, that who are the teams working for. So I think there's probably some reason why I see more, especially like in China, people decided to start a for-profit company that for cause of good instead of choosing a nonprofit structure. Not only because there's many other reasons, because they want to have more freedom, and some people simply feel like they don't have time to quote unquote waste on giving report to a group of 12 people who only occasionally show up. So I think if there's way, ideally, we would like to see a health relationship, but in reality, it is hard. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in on that question?
I would say it is important not to have an echo chamber with your board. The reason you should have an executive director is somebody that can challenge, that can bring in different perspective, that can show that by, thought leadership is important. I would just put it that way. And you really don't want to control that, but it is a reality. Board members who they select themselves. They come from the same background, they come from the same schools, maybe they're in the same country. Familiarity makes it easy to gather, right? And it can sometimes be a scary or uncomfortable position when you have somebody that is not of us, dictating or leading or envisioning a different direction. That can be an uncomfortable space to be in. But I think this question around leadership and responding to the board or who has power, it needs to be a collaborative thing, and you need to have trust in that leader of the organization to do the right things. Boards should not micromanage. They shouldn't be in the weeds of how the organization runs. Of course, governance, legal structures, fiduciary responsibilities are important, but you have you have a leader for the organization for a reason, and you should let him or her lead with freedom and with flexibility and with the assurance and trust that they are doing the right thing.
Thank you, Essie. Arti?
Yeah, very quickly, irrespective of whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit legal structure, I think choosing the board very carefully and then leveraging the board are equally two very important things. And if you choose the board carefully and then leverage the board, you can really travel miles. I think that picking people that can help you move out of the comfort zone and have diverse experiences that they can bring in is very critical. Two, we've seen rotating structures So it's good to have boards that can then rotate a few different members every few years, so that then you can bring in a more diverse pool of people and then have that happen. The third thing is sort of identifying strengths that each board member brings and leveraging that more in their role, right? Like, so it's not like everybody plays every role. I think it's very critical. And the fourth thing is having those enabling structures, both of absorbing the advice that they're giving and then follow the whole feedback loop and follow through on that is very critical, because that keeps the board engaged and enabled as well, and also draws up those boundaries where necessary, right? So I think those are some of the experiences we've had.
Thank you, Arti. Agustín?
Yes, I go along with Arti too. I think the way you choose the board is very critical, but also the culture you create within. And I think that it's important. Peter Drucker used to say, culture, breakfast, strategy in the morning. Okay, so culture, it's a must. What is the culture? And that culture is based on values, principles, and the way the people behave. Behaviors create culture. So the way the people behave is very important to create that space of learning and even taking risk and supporting. And we have to remember that the chairman of the board is a very important person in the board, which I think their main reason to be there is to be the staff of the board. It's not to be the pinnacle of the board, but to be the servant of the board. To the board work the way it should be in base of the mission of the institution. The mission is the North Pole of the institution, and always have to be everything has to be related to that.
Thank you, Agustín. We're very close to the end of our hour, but just before we close, I wanted to put out one more comment, which is philanthropy commands a lot of indirect power on the world stage. How do we attract the leaders with the right skills to wield that power wisely? So if anybody wants to share any closing remarks, sort of reflecting on our leadership conversation, you can use that as a prompt.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, philanthropy commands a lot of indirect power on the world stage. How do we attract the right leaders with the right skills that will wield that power wisely?
How do we attract the right skills? How do we attract the right people with the right skills? Oof. I would go there. Or Ari, you want to go?
I just had one point here. I think fellowships, right, across different, kind of roles and positions act as a very interesting way to attract people that are already passionate but have certain skills and make transitions. It's interesting to see how marathon running attracts a certain type of people with a certain type of culture and thinking and so on, and a little bit, offbeat, and it's consistent, right? So, and that's harnessed, like you will find those kind of people there. Similarly with for spiritual gurus and their followers, it's no surprise, right? Like they sort of help a certain type of people with a certain passion, purpose get together. So how do we emulate? And I think a fellowship kind of a structure emulates that, attracting these people together, and also promotes that cross exchange. So more fellowships with different processes would be a nice way to infuse leadership in different ways across in an economy.
Thanks. I'm going to pass it to Heba now, who has her hand up.
I would agree also with Arti, the fellowship. I myself have benefited from the CUNY Fellowship, which brought this peer-to-peer learning exchange. But there was a very interesting comment in the chat by Sheila. She was saying that we need to listen to what the communities say about leadership. How do they define leadership? Because at the end of the day, no matter how much you bring this global knowledge and the skill set, it has to be kind of blended and transfused with the kind of skills and knowledge that are indigenous. So this global, local kind of blend is important. So listening to communities, how do they define leadership?
Does anybody else want to jump in before we wrap up?
Yes, I agree with Artie and Heba. I think fellowships are very important. There were a lot of fellowship programs before on leadership. Kellogg's Foundation was one of those very famous, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, and that have stopped. I think that's super important. That's a must that we should continue doing permanently. We have to prepare our people for those possible leadership positions. And I would say that we should start the younger, the sooner. And I would say something that I have been in my life working with universities is that possibly the best moment to put these values of solidarity, love to the mankind, service to others, it's around high school. It's when high school, the kids, the youngs are valuing are making their principles and their values, and where they are more mushy, I would say. I don't know if that's the word correctly, but to be touched by these senses of service and the value of service. So if we can choose and help from high school on, of course below is too, but from high school on, for children, for those young, to understand what is possible for them and to have them a broader vision that in time they can have a wonderful career, very fulfilling. It will be wonderful to show them that path. I think that's something that we don't look at it. We cannot show the beautiful path or serving others through philanthropy and to doing good in the community, how fulfilling it is. It's challenging, it's true. We all get burned also, but it's very, very fulfilling. And I think that's something that the youngsters have to feel, have to experience in order to be able to choose what they want to do.
Thank you so much, Agustín. We've reached the end of our hour, so unfortunately that's all the time we have for today. It was a very rich discussion, and I hope that we'll be able to explore these topics more on Alliance. So just a reminder to everyone, if you enjoyed this, make sure that you redeem your subscription code with the code event22. It's in the chat. We'll also be sending that around in an email along with a recording of this event. If you missed part of it or if your colleague missed it, you'll be able to listen to the playback next week. I'd like to end by saying thank you to all of our regional representatives who are panelists today, Agustín, Essie, Finn, Haba, and Artie. Thank you to Badr Jaffa, who is supporting our regional representatives program and also supported this event. Thank you to the Alliance team, in particular our marketing, advertising, and events manager, Amy McGoldrick, who produced today's event, and thank you to all of you for being part of the Alliance community today. Our next webinar will dive into the subject of our December issue, which is Crisis, Reaction, and Resilience, and it's on the 17th of November. This event will be ticketed, so make sure you're subscribed to Alliance using our code so that you can get in for free. And a subscription will also make sure that you get a copy of our print issue, and the invites will come out later this month. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.